Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's SBC webinar, Reimagining Affordability, How Operators Can Up the Ante with KYC and Financial Checks. And before we get into it, I'll remind you to get your questions in if you have any. We have a great panel today. So, yeah, get any questions in, and I'm sure we'll get them asked, if not during the webinar, after the webinar. But few subjects really have grown in importance in the past year as much as affordability. As the economic climate globally intensifies, it's an area in which operators and payment firms are forced to place an increased focus, and they will be for the coming year, especially as regulatory frameworks continue to evolve. As I mentioned, we have a really strong panel of compliance experts today here to discuss this subject, and I will let them introduce themselves. Starting with yourself, Jeremy. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And so I am an independent consultant in the gambling industry, betting and gambling industry. I'm active in the industry since 2004, so nearly celebrating 20 years, with the past 10 years being particularly focused on compliance. I've been the chief compliance at SB Tech and senior compliance at William Hill 888, and now I'm working on my own with various projects.
Amazing. It's great to have you here. And as you mentioned, compliance, it sets us up very nicely for Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Paul Foster. I'm the CEO of Crucial Compliance. And my expertise goes back many years as well. So I was in the industry for just over 10 years before setting up Crucial back in 2019, and focusing on developing solutions for the ongoing problems that we have. So as regulation changes, we try and build solutions to make it easier.
Amazing. Thanks ever so much. And Roger?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Roger. I'm responsible for all things gambling here at ID Now, and looking forward to talk about compliance. And as you can also see behind Paul, that compliance is crucial nowadays. So really happy to be here with everyone, and looking forward to a great conversation with the audience as well.
Amazing, and I think you've stolen my first line there with that one. So nice one, Roger. And joining us all the way from Estonia, certainly last but certainly not least, Alexander. How are you, my friend?
Thank you very much. I'm very well. My name is Alexander. I'm attorney at law with almost 20 years experience. I was recently Group Chief Compliance Officer and General Counsel for a company called Olympic Entertainment Group and Olybet, which is the largest land-based gaming operator in Europe. Before, I was also one of the first employees of Wise, so people from the UK may know this name as well. And I'm pleased to be here with all of you.
Amazing. Thanks ever so much. It's great to have you, and it's great to have everyone, a real bringing a lot of perspectives and some real expert insight. But firstly, I guess, since I've not been in the industry for an incredibly long time, but I've been in it for long enough. And since I've been in the industry, the balance of a frictionless user experience and ensuring the correct anti-fraud and player protection checks are in place has been a continuous conundrum. I guess in recent years, it would be good to get your perspective on how you've seen this balance evolve and how you've seen this perspective change a little bit. Alexander, if you want to start us off with that one.
Well, it really depends on the country, because we should keep in mind that countries like United Kingdom, Netherlands, everything in Western Europe are much more ahead of the rest of European Union, and obviously many countries, if you go east and south, are less advanced. So I think there is a much bigger pressure in Northern and Western Hemisphere in compliance and fraud prevention, which obviously led to decline in gaming companies' revenues. But it also guaranteed much better protection of those customers who are still loyal to licensed and diligent operators. Because that's another trend we are seeing, that gray market and black market in some of the countries is much bigger than local licensed market. And while regulators are very focused on improving compliance for licensed operators, and operators are generally contributing to that well, this is a threat which is growing still.
And Paul, I will let you come in there.
Yeah, I think, you know, the big problem has not been necessarily the data, but it's how we use it. You know, looking back a few years, we had very siloed departments within the gaming operations, which meant that, you know, only one team of people saw the key data. What we're now doing is sharing that data around to enhance player protection. And, you know, the new systems that are out there, the new solutions that are out there are vastly improved. A lot of them are now gaming specific, so they're providing the right data. So, you know, although we were kind of operating 5 years ago with a hand kind of one hand behind our backs, now I'm glad to say that the solutions are coming out and we're able to start sharing that data internally, and multiple teams are getting to use that data. So yes, regulation has got more stringent, but we have been able to improve the data and improve the data sharing across the organizations, which is creating a much more kind of fluid process.
Brilliant. And Roger, I'll let you add on that.
Yeah, I think you know, what we're seeing across is, I think when I, you know, kind of came into the industry, which was not so long ago, it was in 2016. It was a lot more like you know, used to say like Wild Wild West, you know, like who's got the biggest gun almost, you know, who's got the better sign up offers, and it was more about, you know, kind of, let's say, advertising lavish lifestyles or whatever, you know. So it's since then, though, and I must say, especially in the last 3 years, a hell of a lot has changed from a mindset perspective in the industry. So rather than, let's say, advertising really what's the biggest, you know, sign up offer, what's the best, you know, kind of perk you're gonna get, it's more about, you know, playing safe, that your money is safe, that the operator will do, you know, the best they can in terms of, you know, controlling your spend and also what you're losing, as well as obviously, you know, depositing money. Then you've got obviously other things, you know, such as, let's say, you know, fraud that has been industry forever, where people obviously try to, you know, let's say, you know, fleece the operators for any bonuses or whatever. And a lot of that has to do with the technology that has come into this industry. Because if you also compare it only 8 years ago, there's been a few, you know, suppliers, and it was kind of like a chore. Oh, I've got to integrate this now, and, you know, what's it going to give me? But now it actually gives you a lot of a better understanding and really using the compliance technology as an enabler rather than a hindrance to their business. So it's been a huge mindset switch, and that has come from top to bottom. I mean, I'm not saying everyone does it, but let's say especially the license operators, you know, they obviously run a huge risk of fines or any reputational damage. So obviously they want to do their best they can. But also when we look at this kind of like gray markets, or what I call it, also the mindset has switched there to do a lot more than there was before. So yeah, it's been quite a lot in terms of the, you know, the change, and we still continue to see it, how companies embrace technology or compliance as a whole, I would say.
Yeah, it definitely has been fascinating to oversee that change and to be part of it as well, I guess. And Jeremy, to conclude us on that question, a lot of good points already made.
Yeah, and I think you started by presenting very well the fact that this is a conundrum, and both Paul and Roger touched on the importance of data and technology. And here there are really two aspects. There is the aspect of the friction and the pain point that is created to the players if the data is not provided in a very unified way and aggregated way. And that's the second technology aspect I wanted to raise here, is that although we can debate the amount of checks, the amount of data providers that will be involved in giving the options for the players to verify their identity, to verify their affordability, potentially verify all kind of compliance checks. There is still a delay in the technology implementation on the operator's side. And today there are very few examples of operators or technology providers that are capable to aggregate all those data points and provide a very clear picture, what in the UKGC language they would call the single customer view, of all the results of all those checkpoints. And today, this is potentially the biggest friction I identify in the industry for the operators. They have a wide range of data providers, KYC providers, suppliers that help them identify all the things that they need to identify, but they are not yet capable to create a unique picture of the player profile and the player identity that they are building from all those data points. And if they can, the data itself is not always perfectly or ultimately utilized, like Paul was mentioning. And this is potentially, for me, the biggest challenge the industry is facing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, it's a very general question, and you've given me a plethora of good answers, really. So it's hard to know which avenue to go down next. But I think the data is vital. So I think that's where we go next. I think the data is really important, not just having the data, but as you both mentioned, being able to use it and maximize it. So, Roger, from your perspective, in terms of data, how has the way we use data changed, and why is it so important that not just gathering the data, but being able to maximize the data that's available is so important in today's world?
Well, I mean, simple answer is because, the world changes every day pretty much, right? And, you have to be, let's say you have to use the data in real time. And that's the first challenge, right? Because, I mean, what's data to you if you're gonna analyze it a week later? That's not good enough, So you need to have the data readily available in real time, giving you real time notifications, giving you real time and insight into what's going on with your player base. And especially, I mean, we all know that, let's say, the number of vulnerable people, of course, varies from study to study. But let's say, let's go with a 3 to 10% of all your players might be, highly vulnerable players, right? So, especially for those 3 to 10%, if you don't get the data in time, you cannot intervene. If you don't get the data in time, something bad might happen, in terms of losing huge sums, a huge amount of money. And without having it in real time, it's no good use, I mean, like Jeremy said, it's great to have data, but then it needs to be utilized in a way where it helps. And obviously it is hugely helpful when you have people like Paul, an example, that was working for an operator, or anyone else who has kind of gone from that operator to supplier side. Those people are really crucial to our supplier industry as well, because they really speak the language. They know exactly what needs to be done in order to fulfill processes, but also at the same time educate the people in the operator how to use that data and which endpoints do you need, what should you do with this data, etc., etc. So yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest headline I can give you is it has to be live in real time data.
And I just to go further on from that, Roger, a few years ago, when the first kind of responsible gaming models came out that we're all using, they were either in-house developed and ran, at best once a week. Most were ran once a month. So completely no good at doing anything positive. A lot of the solutions were black box, so we didn't know actually what was happening. So all you got was this person is high risk of becoming a problem gambler. It doesn't really tell you anything. And over the years, what we've been able to do is through research, development, studies, is to, stop focusing on responsible gaming as a means and start looking at prevention of gambling related harm. So we're trying to identify players in real time a lot sooner. And the markers of harm are one way of doing it. We use markers of harm, several companies do, which is several different models which look at your behavior. And this is where it comes back to the single view of customer that Jeremy was talking about. If you can get all the data sources in a business, and remember there are a lot, you've got multiple databases, you've got multiple platforms, you've got multiple payment methods. And if you can pull all that information and start modeling that player's behavior, whenever they change their behavior, you can start to really understand that something has changed. It's like, why has it changed? Now, it doesn't tell you that they're actually experienced gambling related harm, but it can show you that there may be. And the ability then to interact really quickly is key. So that data has to be used in real time. It has to be high quality data, and it has to be able to be modeled in a way that matches what your player profiles are.
Yeah, Jeremy, anything to add there? It seems like
I just think that black boxes are actually the real enemy of this industry, because operators are facing, this is their responsibility. It's not just a matter of the responsible gaming and safer gambling of the players. It's the responsibility of the operators. Are you capable? Are you even able to determine who your players are, how they are behaving, how they can behave maximum, what is the maximum, what is their comfort zone? Do you know your players? And this is going to take us all the time, I think, for me, the element that is the most important is that the responsibility is on the operator to know its customer, to KYC, not as a tick box exercise and as a service agreement with a KYC company, but as the origin, really the foundation of driving your business when you are an operator. You need to know your customers. And for that, you need to be able to have the tools that are capable to read in real time the information that those customers send you and the suppliers are also sending you from external sources. Are you capable to aggregate all of this, to read and to have a very clear picture of your business? If not, then it's super worrying, because that means that you don't have actually a control on your assets, on your players, and on your business. How do you work?
Yeah, definitely. And Alexander, to round us off there.
Well, I share the views which were shared by everyone here. I would just like to highlight that what worries me is what could be the next step for Gaming Commission. While establishing those thresholds for vulnerability checks for online at the moment, they may start looking at land-based gaming operators, which have much more complicated product from a compliance standpoint to polish for real-time checks. That's considering some technology bottlenecks, that's almost impossible in some cases. So that's what makes me worried. On the other side, I think Gaming Commission is confirming that several operators had made significant investments into AML, KYC, and affordability already. So technology is there, suppliers are there. It's up to every operator to decide which amount to invest into that function, and they can get it done for online. That's not an issue, really.
Okay, yeah. And before we move the conversation on a little bit, I did want to get to one of the audience questions that we've had, and that is what can be. It's quite an interesting one, because we sort of speak of the importance of not working in silos for operators, like in different aspects of their operation. And the question comes in is what can be improved in the area of collaboration and inter-operator information sharing. How big of a challenge does the industry face in promoting that collaboration whilst maintaining market integrity and competitiveness? So, expanding out, not just be, operator by operator data sharing, something that's very optimistic, if I'm being honest, but an interesting prospect nonetheless. Because the question concludes: limited visibility of accurate share of wallet, for example, can leave operators with gaps in data or relying on potentially inaccurate testimony. So, is it a bit too optimistic to think of a world where we get a bit more operator data sharing?
Yeah, I think it is. In the UK, we got a trial at the moment for single view of customer. The whole idea of that was it was gonna be about data sharing on people who were at harm or at risk of harm. It's been very much pared back to just look at suicides and real problems for people. I sat on a panel with Andrew Rhodes from the UK GC, and he was quite open. They're not a data company. All right, a gambling commission is not a data company, so they don't feel they should be the ones to share. And we work in a world where data is our bread and butter. Okay, our player data is what is valuable to every company. So the idea that that's going to start being shared, I think, is very optimistic. I don't see it happening any day soon. Yes, there's a lot of collaboration going on, but you really, if you share your player data, then you're losing your advantage. And so I don't see it being able to be shared today in any way that would be meaningful to help player protection.
But I think on that aspect, actually the data is already shared also with third parties that are, let's call them, common denominators. And Andrew Rhodes actually did open the door to clarifications around the role of those third-party actors that have access in common to all this data. And those are the banks. And this is with the relation of the open banking topic. It's not just sharing data, doesn't just involve the operators themselves that are getting access to some information from their players. All the players, this is a real money industry, are transacting with financial institutions. Financial institutions have the right and the ability to view extra data that those operators do not have. And it seems, for me, this is optimistic, that the UK GC is starting to understand with their consultation the fact that opening the credit checks through open banking, through anonymous access to some anonymous data of the players, which would not be shared actually to the operators, but just a result of this information would be informing the operators for their actions to take, is a good step. We cannot consider inter-operator information sharing without including the wider range of stakeholders of this industry, particularly the banks.
I mean, Jeremy, if you remember on one of the podcasts that we did together in 2019, already then I had, I think it must have been about 5 to 10 minutes rant about it, because like I said about it back then, how do you expect operators to know exactly what the financial circumstances of that person is when you don't have access to that data? I mean, why are you gonna get a rabbit out of your cylinder hat? I don't know. It's one of those things. I mean, obviously, then it depends kind of let's say companies that provide those data checks to find that what I would call secret source, where you get a lot more information through various alternative data sources. So not only the CRAs, but also from well, I'm not gonna say what my secret is, but let's say from various other data forms. So and it's then about getting that data together and then it's creating the best picture of the person that you possibly can. Now, again, the GC are kind of opening themselves up for certain, I guess, legal battles, because if they want to find, let's say, an operator for, let's say, some wrongdoings, but then they say, hey, look, whoever supplier did all these checks for me. This is all the data that we could get. It has all the timestamp on it, and this is what we know about this player. So it's like, sometimes we find ourselves in those, let's say, holes of a lot of gray and a lot of not knowing how to actually interpret and how to action those things. And I see this is also a big thing, where let's say the regulators leave themselves open for interpretation when it could be a lot easier. I mean, I know the corporate world isn't easy at all, and everyone has something to say, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's just you use whatever is available to you. But is it really 100% the picture of the player? It definitely isn't. So it's about finding ways how to really improve it. But again, unless the, let's say, regulators and all the other, let's say, parts of it come together, like Jeremy said, it's not just the operators. It's also, in my opinion, also the financial services industry that has a huge responsibility here, which which has never been taken. It's always easy to find a headline about a gambling company in a tabloid or something. But I guess it's then boring to really attack or put some others into responsibility and show some accountability.
Yeah, and I think before we're going to stick with the UK GC, but before we do, what a tool that has been cited as being potentially pivotal in helping break down barriers and build a financial picture of a player is open banking. Alexander, do you think open banking could be crucial, and do you think we're close to seeing operators further utilize open banking and further embrace the technology to build a better picture of their player?
Well, of course, open banking is not a perfect solution now. You get some level of quality data from there, and I would argue, that's good for, let's say, low-value customer, mass market. But from operator standpoint, they frequently need to go into much more details about spending patterns, financial circumstances. So open banking doesn't really help to deal with your, let's say, top 1% of customers, which brings you 30% of gross gaming revenue. But for daily checks, some simplification of operations for sure. And if you don't mind, I will add a previous question from the audience.
Yeah.
That in case of, I would put parallel with anti-money laundering data sharing, because the laws normally allow companies with AML obligations to share information about suspicious between themselves. And there are even private companies which facilitate this type of exchange. But I think gaming industry cannot do that itself without regulator support and without regulators, probably legislative initiatives. So we could share, for example, data about people whom we have blacklisted because of actual problems with responsible gaming, overspending, and so on. So other operators will be aware of that and will take measures. I think that's what regulator would like to do, but they need to be proactive as well.
Yeah, definitely. It does need more action from regulators for sure. And we have seen. Before I move on, actually, I'll let you guys, if you have anything to add on the potential impact of open banking, I will let you jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, open banking is we've obviously just said that obviously a lot of more operators start using open banking, but in the end of the day, you have to look at the player side. What's the adoption rate? I can tell you right now that the adoption rate is below 4%. So it's like, how do you use it? I think open banking is a great product when it comes to just, like, let's say, verifying your player initially. But then again, you have to look at, okay, if you base your verification purely on someone's bank account, how do you know that this person actually opened a bank account? So then you go into, we can go down a huge rabbit hole of, how was that person verified for the bank? Or, I mean, what does a bank mean, right? I mean, nowadays you have mobile banks, you have obviously your brick and mortar banks. So how do you then class them into open banking? What do you class as secure? Do you have then also, like, let's say, stages where you say, okay, if that person is with an example, I don't know, like Barclays or HSBC or whatever, does that count as a higher, let's say, safety than an example a neobank? I mean, I'm not going to say a name because otherwise people are going to say I'm talking badly about them. But it's that kind of thing, right? I mean, open banking surely is a great solution, but I think there's also a lot to work on that. But then again, we depend on the data that the bank share and not what the player shares.
Yeah.
And one of the risks for me of open banking is, you say, it's up to the person to give you access, but B, to tell you about all their bank accounts. And what we're normally seeing is somebody will give access to their main bank account, but they may use a lot of other bank accounts. So you don't get a true picture. What you do is get a picture of that bank account and how that individual uses that bank account.
Exactly.
And I'm sure, like everybody else, I have an online bank, I have a land-based bank, and I use them for different things. So just looking at one or the other wouldn't give you a true picture of myself, and that's part of the problem. Yes, it is part of the solution, and it's great that we're getting it if people will give us access, but they're not giving us access to everything. So you can still be making the wrong decision, even looking at the right data.
Okay, and that is interesting. There's a valid points about open banking. I think, I think for that growth, we do need to see it be more embraced by the mainstream, and for adoption rates to grow. To bring it back to regulators, we've had a question in, actually. Bear with me, it's quite long, but I think it's quite an important question, and it relates to the the UKGC. Taking me back to school. The UKGC recently published in a blog detailing the financial risk checks, and they mentioned of credit reference agencies. Given limitations around access to credit information other than to verify a customer's identity, how do you think the GC are expecting operators to access this level of information? Gambling companies do not have the same level of access to an individual's financial information as the credit loan industry. Something you guys have been speaking about.
Yeah, I think that's why I just really mentioned. I mean, it's that whole area. What data you have available, and then again, it's you need some extra alternative data, which again, not everyone knows about that it's available. But it's just, I mean, I could be a little bit mean here, but I'm not going to be. But yeah, it's a huge issue, because
Yeah, and just looking at your credit score, for instance, that shows you how good you are at repaying debt. Now, it doesn't actually say whether you can afford that debt. It doesn't say whether you are actively, in credit or aren't using credit. And what it does, it gives you a score. And how useful is that score? Well, under the GC checks, you're supposed to take it into account. But what does that mean? You can be one of the wealthiest people in the world, but if you keep missing your payments because you're not very organized, then you're going to have a poor credit score. And likewise, somebody who is young and doesn't actually have any debt, who doesn't use credit cards, they're not today going to have a very good credit score. So it is useful, but there cannot be an over kind of bearance on the use of credit scores. It has to be just one piece of data that you take into account.
And Jeremy, anything to add there?
No, nothing further to add beside the fact that if young people don't have credit score, maybe that will hinder their access to the gambling industry, and maybe this is what the regulator would be looking for, but that would be too Machiavellic.
Okay, and I'll keep it with the UKGC, because Alexander, they did recently provide further insight on what light touch financial checks will entail. Can I guess can you provide some more insights on these checks and just how many consumers will be, or it feels weird saying consumers, how many players will be impacted?
So, if I may, I would say that GC is making effort explaining that checks will be frictionless and will affect small numbers of customers, which may be true in theory, but as we spoke already, checks cannot be really frictionless because of reality is stronger than imagination, I would say. But it's not so important how many customers will be affected. That's important from responsible gaming standpoint, a regulator standpoint. From operator standpoint, it's important how much GGR, so gross gaming revenue, may you lose. And even according to Gambling Commission forecasts, which are maybe challenged and are different for different operators, well, I would say that it's up to 30% of gaming revenue, which is under a big question mark because of those checks. And light core checks, which apply at £125 per month and £500 per month, well, I just don't see how those could work frictionless, because it's required to check geo affordability. It's required to check financial situation of a customer. So that's a bit too much, considering that average annual salary in the UK is £33,000. I don't think that it's a good approach to touch roughly 70% of customers with those checks, to be honest.
Yeah. And just going on Alexander's point there, they say that the net loss once year, £125 in a month, there should be a financial check. Now, £125 is less than £5 a day. So, they say, no, it's only going to apply to a few people. It's not. You run your database on an average gaming company, and, a huge chunk of players will be losing about £125 a month. Those are your core players. And to be honest, those are your sustainable players that you actually want, because you want them coming in, playing regularly, but playing within their means and in control. And for somebody who is playing within their means, playing in control, who's playing the games they enjoy, using it for fun, sitting on the bus on the way home every day, spending £5, to suddenly be told that we need access to your banking, it's going to be very intrusive. They're going to go, what? Sorry, why? It doesn't make any sense at the levels that they're talking about. Yes, if you're talking about £2,000 loss, then, or most people will go, yeah, I have lost a lot of money. But I don't see it being the correct level of review, and I think it will drag too many customers in, and it isn't going to be frictionless, as Alexander said.
Yeah, and then also if you put into touch, so let's say if you because you have those different data, let's say, bases that you can go to. I mean, if we look an example, geo affordability, right? I mean, geo affordability on its own as a check doesn't say nothing about a person, right? It just gives you an average income of that postcode, right, or of that street. I mean, what's that of usage? I mean, it's I mean, first of all, I would think it's discriminating, right? I mean, against a person, let's say, because you live somewhere, you cannot spend more than whatever, right? I mean, and it's for us suppliers really then to go to say, so, like, let's say what we've created is 6 different data points. Those 6 different data points really look at your where you live, if you own where you live, or if you're renting, what's your monthly rent, what's your council tax band, what your financial situation is, what's the likelihood of you defaulting on a payment, so we can provide that as well. But again, I have to say here, all of this data is probably available, I would say, between 60 to 80% of all players, right? So then you still got 20 to 40% players where you're going to have to ask them for bank statements, pay slips, etc., etc. And I can tell you already that probably not everyone will do, and they will just then revert back to going into some sort of casino site that isn't licensed in the country because they can do whatever they like, and let's say over regulation is not a good thing. And also what I would also say is that I think sometimes regulators, they don't fully understand the technology that's out there in the market. And I would wish that they would just, let's say, come forward and we can discuss it together. And I know it's a huge responsibility. It's a lot of work. And again, I know that the government has a restricted budget that they give the UKGC. So I think it's a what you call it. It's like a circle that we find ourselves in, basically just going around the point without getting to the point.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle for sure. And Jeremy, I'll bring you in there. What have you made of the sort of light touch financial checks of the UKGC? Do you think any sort of defence for the regulator or any defence for the checks that are set to take place?
Well, it's a very long and hesitant path to trial and error from their side of consultations, and because based on what Roger was just saying now, also, I mean, we could potentially understand why they were raising the idea in not a long time ago that national average disposable income should be the marker, the basic marker of understanding what players should be allowed to spend at a casino without further checks, because those checks are so wide, complicated, complex in understanding the full picture, that in that case, until you have full proof of the claims of affordability of the player, then you should allow them only to spend what makes sense based on the national statistics of the economy. But I don't think that this is the solution. And I want to understand also, maybe from you, Paul, because what Roger was just saying about explaining and educating the regulators about the capabilities of technology. You have long time access and discussions with the regulators, not only the UK, but with all the jurisdictions where you have been involved and active with. What is really their level of understanding and their level of willingness to understand?
So I think the regulators, I'm going to kind of come to their defense, because a lot of them feel under political pressure to do changes. They're not actually the changes they would make. Some of these financial vulnerability, it is a political hot potato in the UK. But then you then go to the AML rules around Europe and then the global AML rules and regulations, and they are driving a lot of the work that's being done. So the regulators themselves are, they want to understand, they want to get it right. But if they've got political pressure forcing them down an avenue and they're not comfortable, how will we ever get comfortable with it? And I do, I have conversations with them, and I have some sympathy for them. They're being pushed by people for political reasoning to do some of these things. And it doesn't make sense, and they know it doesn't make sense. So in order to get around it, they use words like frictionless. And, we all know it's never going to be frictionless. I think it's really interested in the Andrew Rhodes grilling the other week, when, they were basically laughing at him when he said he's going to be frictionless, because the MPs didn't believe him either. So, the regulators can regulate better. I think they're more open now. They talk to a lot of third parties. They talk to a lot of people around the industry who have the knowledge, and that's getting better and better. They do see the technology kind of platforms now that are available, and they are happy to look at them. They'll never say we prefer this or the other, but what they will do is look at it and go, yeah, that's good. That will do the job. So I think it's an evolution, but they have to either get more independence as regulators, or they have to grow up and mature.
Yeah, it's quite strong words, Paul. But it does make sense, and it's an interesting point you make about the Andrew Rhodes speech as well, and the expectation of it being frictionless is, it's too optimistic, really, isn't it? And it's highly unlikely. But before we've got one more audience question before we sort of wrap up, and I'll try and wrap up on an optimistic note as well. But we had a question in about privacy laws, sort of goes back to chapter 1 of our conversation. But do you think privacy laws will limit the information that can be obtained and collected for operators?
Yes. Now you are, we're very lucky that in our terms and conditions, we always say for regulatory purposes, we can use data for regulatory purposes. We can process your data. We can contact you. But in reality, we've got to take that data and use it for the purpose that we're getting it for, not misusing it. And we've got to, track the use of it in our businesses. So, it's creating internal friction, the privacy laws. Now, they're there for a very good reason, but, it doesn't help gambling operators at all in many cases. And that's my opinion.
And I think that actually the whole single customer view project has been redesigned and redefined by our friends and colleagues, DPOs and data privacy gatekeepers, probably rightly so, but it is completely defining and designing what we can do and what we cannot do with those projects. And this is actually very good because it's a reality check to how feasible things are and how ambitious we need to be more on the responsibility of the business that is operating. It has its own responsibility, as I was saying at the beginning, to know its customers as a business fundamental, rather than just adding and adding and adding checks, whether they are frictionless or painless or not. This is never going to be an ultimate Big Brother world of having a single customer data repository for each and every one that wants to access a gambling product or a horse racing or scratching a card at a kiosk. It's not the way the direction it should take.
If I may add to that point, that current initiative by Gaming Commission doesn't really support a single customer view, because in the white paper, they explicitly highlight the fact that information gathered for this affordability check, vulnerability check, should be only used for that particular purpose. So it's super hard to argue whether we can use that for AML, for example, which is another legal ground for processing customer data. So we probably can, because that's coming from the law, but we can forget using that, for example, for marketing automation and for, let's say, internal operations to optimize something. So it's super tricky to say what actual implementation will be and what will be the best practice for the sector if this initiative will come as it's planned.
Okay,
and you're right, Alexander, here on the fact that at the end of the day, it's a matter of governance internally. Also, before looking at the overall industry picture, internally it is already a matter of debates and ethics and understanding the governance of the data that operators are collecting. What can be used by marketing? What should never reach their hands? Why wouldn't it be able? This is, I think, key for understanding the evolution of this industry.
Yes, it certainly is vital, and I've probably got time for one more question from myself. And we mentioned the importance of operators not working in silos anymore. We've mentioned that it's optimistic for the potential of data sharing between operators, but just how important is collaboration when it comes to player safety, whether it's collaboration between the financial sector and operators, or even within operators. I know it's a big theme of the payments track at the SBC Barcelona Summit next week is the payments brings other elements of operators together. It brings all aspects of an operator's business together. Just how important is collaboration? I'll give you each briefly a chance to answer that one.
I think, I've been a part of many industry collaborations over the years, everybody starts out with the best intentions, and everybody says, "Yeah, let's share, let's work together." And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we need to get some data. So then you go to your data team. You go, "Can we extract the data?" They go, "Yeah," but then you've got to get authorization from InfoSec. So you go to InfoSec and say, "What do you want the data for?" "Oh no, I can't leave the building." It's a vicious circle that you just get stuck in. So the working groups are really positive for sharing best practice. That's what they're best for, but they're not very good for looking at actual data and analyzing it as a collaboration. So use it for best practice. If you can share how you're doing something well with other operators, that's a fantastic thing to do. And some operators are out there doing the sharing, others won't share. So when you go to these events, they can be either really good or very frustrating.
Yeah, by the way, I can really recommend everyone to go to SBC Barcelona Summit. And by the way, I wasn't paid for by SBC to say that. It is gearing up to be one of the biggest gambling events that there are in the world. There's going to be a hell of a lot of operators, a lot of suppliers, a lot of lawyers and consultants that can really help with the projects. But coming back, let's say to collaboration, I think do I think will we ever get to a point where there's data sharing in the industry? Definitely not, unless there is a thing like an example, a digital identity that you have to verify yourself with that is mandated by the government, where all of that data is an example visible, that you are an example of high risk of gambling harm, or that you don't, or that you should only be spending that much a month. Until that comes in, it's going to be impossible to share the data in the industry, just because of competitiveness, etc. And then again, collaboration with the financial services. Today the operators could be working with financial services companies, but unless they get mandated to share that data, again, nothing's going to happen unless some huge sums flow, and someone lobbies. But it's I think really to change all of it, this has to be led by the actual government itself. But we all know how good the UK government is in handling other things as well. So I think this is probably last on the list. But let's see what happens. But I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
And Alexander, anything more?
Well, I would just say that without collaborating between each other as an industry, we will not survive. And I'm not talking here about regulatory pressure. I'm talking about gray and black market, where we really need to focus on and explain to regulators and legislators that this is where treat for customers coming, and that market in many countries are significantly bigger than legal markets. So I think this topic is not properly covered, and we as an industry should step out loudly to handle that.
And I think that this is exactly where those events as a collaboration group between the industry and its regulators is really critical. And the black market is definitely not only the most important topic that should be on their agenda. It is here, it is growing, and when you go and you walk through the events with a bit of education, you can understand how things are working in some at some industry stakeholders, and it would be very good for the regulators to understand better this picture, because this is a quite bleak picture and it is growing and becoming darker and darker. Okay,
well, yeah, you know, a very, very heavy note to finish in the end, but I think I would like to thank the audience, because we have certainly collaborated to make this a really insightful and interesting webinar. The engagement of the audience has definitely helped, provided some great questions, some great perspective. And obviously, thank you to the panelists. Well, we've every single one of you have provided some great responses, all given a different perspective as well. So it's been fantastic, and we've ran over time, but it's been well worth it, because it's been a really interesting and important discussion as well. And yeah, thanks ever so much, guys, and look forward to continuing the discussions next week.